Hi Booktube, the active mind just made this 20 bookish questions tag a few days ago, and I've seen a few of my favorite booktubers doing it, so I thought I'd hop on the little trend on Booktube and give it a go. If my eyes look a little dead, vampiric, it's because I haven't slept. Let's go. So question 1 is, how many books are too many books in a series? Now the thing with this question is, I feel it's really targeted towards people who read a lot of sci-fi and fantasy series, because those are the ones that tend to be super long and drawn out. And I like to think that I read everything and I'm open to everything, and I certainly am. There's no snobbery in my view of different genres or anything like that. But I'm still young. I still haven't had enough experience with a lot of those kind of series to really answer this properly. So I think, as a general answer, when it starts to get silly and it feels like, here we go again, this is like... So when it gets to that kind of point, that's when I feel maybe it's time to stop. I don't necessarily have a number in mind, be it 3, 5, 10, 20. I'm sure there are a lot of series that can go on for much longer than you think and sustain like a high level of greatness or entertainment at least. So I wouldn't give a number, but certainly when it gets silly, I'd stop. How do you feel about cliffhangers? This is actually something that I've been thinking about a lot recently, because this year I've watched a ton of TV shows and I'm watching a lot of television, which obviously has a lot of cliffhangers. And it's one of those that I feel really conflicted about. I love great episode cliffhangers where, next week, the next episode is going to come out. You've got 7 days to wait to build up excitement for the crazy ending of the previous episode. You desperately want to know what's going to happen. You would bite someone's arm off for it. You would do unspeakable, heinous crimes to find out what happens. I like those. I like book chapter cliffhangers at the end of chapters, because, I want to read more. But, when those distractions start coming in and you start thinking, oh, maybe I should put the book down, go and do this, go and do that, a nice cliffhanger to end a chapter is going to push you to read on a little bit more. So I like that. What I kind of struggle with is this trend that I've seen. I say trend like it's something new, but it's been happening for a couple decades now, where a TV show will split their finale across a season finale and a season opener of the subsequent season. So you might have to wait a year to actually finish the episode, to finish that storyline. They basically just make a long episode and cut it in half. I'm not sure I'm a fan of that. When I'm going back and watching shows like Smallville, which I did recently, or Supernatural, which I'm watching now, or The Walking Dead or something like that, because they're older, I can binge them and I can just move straight to that next episode and it doesn't matter. But if I'm watching them as they come out, I think it's just going to bother me. I had this issue, well, I say issue, but I love the film. The second Spider-Verse film, Across the Spider-Verse, was basically half a film, but I thought it was a masterpiece at the same time. So certainly I can give leeway if you've done something really well. If you end the whole book on a cliffhanger, I'm not sure I would take that. Ending chapters is great. I'm not sure I like this whole splitting one episode into two. I feel it's a little gimmicky. It's a bit like... I just finished a season of Supernatural. I'm not sure, 7 or 8 or something like that. And what I liked is they managed to end with a cliffhanger because the characters are in a precarious position. You're not sure what's going to happen with them. But the storyline of the episode concluded. It felt like a complete episode that satisfied you. The story, beats, everything felt natural, and what was set up in the season opener and throughout the early parts of the season felt like it was concluded, but it also set up something for the future that gets you excited. I like that. Not so much the split thing. But that's TV, anyway. Whatever. Question 3 is hardcover or paperback? I think paperback, a nice floppy paperback like this, because it just feels easier to read. And if it's easier to read, then I'm going to read more. I had a difficult experience with the War and Peace hardcover. It's a Penguin cloth bound. Speaking in the microphone here. Somewhere down here. This one. It's really heavy. Very cumbersome and doesn't open easily. It's not loose, not floppy, nothing like that. So I ended up reading a lot more of it on the e-reader than on this. It became sort of more of a display piece, and I don't want that to be how I buy books. Certainly that's not how And certainly that's not how I buy books anymore. I think technically the answer here would just be scrap both of them and use an e-reader. But from this, certainly I'd pick paperbacks. Nice floppy paperback. Love that. Favorite book? I just lifted it up. It's War and Peace. I recently read this. I say read this, I mean, it was a long saga. I started it and then stopped it and then came back to it because I had a reading slump. So it was a long reading process. But I recently finished it and it became my number one favorite book. What's there to say about it that hasn't been said? I'm not sure. I should make a whole video on it. But there's that thing that you might relate to where, let's say you review films, books, things like that, because I write a lot of film reviews on Letterboxd, for example. And I'll be going through writing big lengthy essays and reviews and things like that. But then it'll come to a rewatch of 2001 Space Odyssey, which is my favorite film. And for ages I've said, okay, you haven't written something great on this or something really like full of heart on this film, which is your favorite film. So maybe now's the time to do it. And then I get there and I sort of chicken out and write, yeah, I just rewatched my favorite film. And then I move on and the next review of a film I liked way less is a lot longer and more in depth. I do maybe struggle a little bit to put into words the love for that sort of absolute pinnacle of the art form. One of my favorite experiences. With War and Peace, why I loved it, I think, because it was so engrossing for, 1,500 pages almost. You fall in love with so many characters. You become so invested in so many characters' fates and relationships, on or off, potential. The beautiful prose, some of the poetic moments, that Napoleon as a figure was so interesting, so cool. The whole landscape, an epic saga, I loved it. But I think it would be good to mention what was my favorite for a while, since this recently took the place, and that's probably Runaway Horses by Yukio Mishima. I would usually say his whole Sea of Fertility tetralogy, which is a 4-part book series, but I thought if I had to pick one, it'd be Runaway Horses. But I think War and Peace has overtaken that. Also, am I speaking too fast? I don't know. I feel like a little hyper. I haven't slept and it's giving me this reverse feeling. Anyways, the next question is, who's your favorite author? Again, like I mentioned with the first question about series lengths, I feel like I'm too young to answer this properly. I'm 20, just like the 20 bookish questions on the tag. I know the beard maybe makes me look older, but I don't have enough writers of whom I've read a bunch of books from. There are a few writers that I've read a bunch of books from, but mostly a lot of writers that I've read one book from. Like Tolstoy, I've read War and Peace, for example. So, yeah, he's probably going to end up being one of my favorite writers after I read Anna Karenina and maybe a couple other things that he's written. But how can I say now after I've read one book? And that's the case with so many writers whose one masterpiece that I've read, I've loved. But I do have a couple answers. I would say Yukio Mishima is my favorite novelist. I mentioned his whole Sea of Fertility earlier. I've read that and a bunch of other his books. Loved everything from him. Loved the Mishima Life in 4 Chapters film. I think I discussed this on my BookTube newbie tag. I'm just a big fan of Mishima. And as a second contender or person, I say Shakespeare. Another person who I've read a lot of and had a lot of just experience with the stories in terms of, obviously you study that stuff at school, but watching Kurosawa's Shakespeare adaptations over and over again. I have all the Blu-rays here on my shelf. Watching Orson Welles, who's over here, sorry if I obstructed the camera, watching his Shakespeare adaptations, growing up with animated play, cartoon things. He's just someone that's been ever present in my life and that I love. So him, Shakespeare and Mishima, I think. Ideal book length, that's the next question. When I'm picking a book to read, it's probably a 150-page book because it feels like, oh yeah, low commitment, enjoy this and then move on to something else. But when I look back on the best experiences I've had, it's probably a longer book. More difficult to make the decision to start and get into, but probably the books that I get the most enjoyment from. Not to say that I don't love a lot of shorter books or even short story collections like the Sherlock Holmes series, for example, but I think probably something longer. The next question is most recent book you couldn't finish. I don't really DNF books because, you know, I am open to reading everything, but when it comes down to making a decision of what to read next, I'm trying to find probably another 5-star type of read, and I love classics above all. So I'm sort of going with books that I'm probably going to like. And so I do end up liking them, and I do end up finishing them. So like I don't have that many negative experiences. I'm not like reading sort of the random new releases. Nothing bad about, sorry. There's nothing bad about that. I'd like to add that more into my reading diet. I'd like to just read more in general. But I don't really DNF books, so this doesn't apply so much. But I do have one little shameful story. The Odyssey. I started, read like 100 or something pages of, and entered a reading slump and stopped a few years ago. Then I started it again, reached almost page 200, and then entered a reading slump and stopped. I was loving it. I love the Iliad. It's like one of my top 10 favorite books. I was loving the Odyssey, but it just came at a time where like life encroached upon reading, and I stopped reading and then tried to come back, and then the same thing happened to me with War and Peace. So it's not a comment on the book. I will definitely return to it. That's basically the only thing that can apply for this. The last book I've recommended to someone. I don't know if I can answer this because I either have friends that I talk to that don't care about books at all, so I'm not really recommending anything, or I'm talking to people about like, oh, I just read War and Peace. It was great. I think they already know that even if they haven't read it, so it's not like me pulling something out the bag that they might not have heard of or might not have been on their radar. I don't really recommend to people. I don't know enough bookish people. Maybe if this BookTube gig blows up, you know, as Steve Donahue told me it would, then I'll be recommending books to everyone. But for now, I don't know. I mean, I finished Moby Dick and I was telling a friend about it. It's great, so yeah. Newest book you've read by publication date. That would be Heat 2 by Michael Mann, which came out, like a year and a half ago or something like that, maybe a little more. I don't read so many new releases, but I love Michael Mann's films. Heat is one of my absolute favorite films. If you watched my previous video, you might have noticed I was playing the New Dawn Fades instrumental at some times in the video. So, you know, I love Heat. And I loved Heat 2. I was intending to make a whole what I read in July video, but then I traveled and came back and sort of got out of the BookTube rhythm. But I finished Heat 2 in July, and I should have mentioned it in the video. It was great. If you love Heat or even like it, I think you should give Heat 2 a try. It's a prequel and a sequel. So it follows a character at the end of Heat and what goes on in their life afterwards. And it also follows the main characters of Heat, the characters played by Al Pacino and De Niro and Val Kilmer, before the events of Heat. So when they were younger men. And we're cross-cutting between these multiple timelines. It's a lot of fun. I was reading it while listening to the Heat soundtrack, obviously instrumentals. Yeah, it was a great experience. And oldest book I've read by publication date. So I don't know the exact publication dates. I don't think they are known, but I would say the Iliad and the Book of Genesis. Both a lot of fun in totally different ways. The next question is plays or short stories. I looked through these questions before and sort of tried to come up with some mental answers. And this one I really struggled with. Plays, you know, that includes Shakespeare. So it feels like that should automatically win out. But the experience of reading plays isn't always so natural. So, like, it feels like maybe you should perform them with a group of friends. Or, like, it feels different. It's a different way of reading. So when I read Shakespeare plays, maybe I shouldn't do this, but I've gotten into the habit of, like, sitting down my big Shakespeare book, which is below, like, the whole collected thing. Maybe my iPad or a laptop or something nearby to look up some things in the middle of the reading. And just sort of read aloud the parts of the play. And so I can really listen to the poetry of it, and then by that I can understand it more. That's sort of what I've gotten into the habit of. I don't read Shakespeare like I do a novel or a normal book. Maybe I should do. Maybe people out there can tell me. It's just that when I read, like when I read the Iliad, I read it out loud to myself, just in my room. But obviously that slowed me down. Maybe you guys don't do that. If you don't, let me know, because I feel like when I'm stumbling now. When I read poetry and plays and things like that, I'm sort of, I don't know, programmed to think it's time to read out loud. Maybe it's weird. Maybe I shouldn't do that. I don't know. I've sidetracked myself. That was plays. Short stories feel more natural, but when I'm picking something to read next, I'm always thinking about the next big book. Short stories feels like, okay, yeah, well, I'm doing something for today, for the next hour, but what am I starting on? What's the next week of reading? I guess, if I'm keeping up with my reading pace, an average novel should take a few days, a bigger book maybe longer. So I'm thinking, what's the next thing? So I don't end up reading as many short stories as I want to, but I've loved, I don't know how many Sherlock Holmes short stories I've read and listened to, because there was a time where I was an Audible subscriber, and I just realized I've been paying for the last few months, so I paused the membership. But the best thing I got on Audible was a whole complete Sherlock Holmes audiobook. Everything Sherlock Holmes, all the novels, all the short stories, narrated by, what's his name? I'm forgetting now. I'll put him on screen. Whose voice is fantastic, especially for these books. And I just had a blast with them. I was like mixing between reading them, listening to them on commutes, on walks. Those were great short story experiences I've had. And I feel like I keep hitting this thing. And from time to time, I'll pick up a different short story, look up a different short story writer and read some. I don't know. Maybe short stories. They're Shakespeare for plays, but generally maybe an average short story I'd be more interested in. The next question is about buying or borrowing books and which I prefer. So, buying, definitely. I don't use a library. I used one when I was a kid, and when I was in school, I used them a lot, because I was reading so much of certain series that I, couldn't afford to just buy them all the time. So I was, lending and renting and returning. But now I buy books, or I just get them for free on Project Gutenberg and read them on my Kindle. The easy way. Or potentially through more nefarious means. But, a lot of books I don't buy at all, don't pay for. It's easy when you're a big classics reader just to get stuff digitally. But if it is an option and if I'm getting a physical book, I'm buying it. Holding this upside down. But yeah, buying for me. A book that I dislike that everyone else seems to love. As I said, I mostly read classics, but I'll read all sorts. This is what I'm reading right now. But with classics, sorry, I had a voice crack at my ripe old age. I've had this experience with films where I just get along with the classics. I'm not the type of person that, I don't know, goes into Citizen Kane. Speaking of Orson Welles. My doorbell just rang. So as I was saying, I'm not the type of person to go into Citizen Kane and come out disappointed. And I don't know, I get along with these films, I get along with these books, so I don't have that many of these experiences. I do with more modern things, with more recent films. And maybe I'd have that if I read more recent books. Potentially, I was reading some of the Prelude to Nightfall comic books. And there were a few issues there that I didn't like that seemed to be pretty highly rated, some of the early issues. That's the stuff that the Dark Knight Rises film was based on. The opening issue was like a double-length issue about the origin of Bane, the supervillain. I thought that was a really good issue, but the subsequent issues in Gotham I thought were pretty boring. But people seem to like them. So that's that. Bookmarks or dog ears. If you saw my previous video, you saw I have a lot of bookmarks now from my little US shopping trip. Here's some of the free ones, and I got some paid ones. I bought some. I definitely think bookmarks. I don't really dog ear my pages because I think it makes the book look bad. And also, the dog earring, even when you try and undo it, has a bit of a memory on the page. And if you're doing it too often, then it's sort of, you might open the book to the wrong page, and you'll get to the right page a second later, but it's a little bit annoying. A few years ago when I was reading Great Expectations, it was a Penguin classic, somewhere behind me. I used a bookmark for the main part of the book, but I remember dog-earing some of the back notes pages that I was flicking back and forth through. Because, what else was I going to do? The problem with Penguin Classics is that sometimes the first page of, endnotes is, on the right side of a double-page spread, where the left side is the final page of the book. So it's pretty risky trying to find the right notes page for you and then potentially seeing, the last line of the book. I don't want to see that, obviously. So I remember dog-earing some of those pages so I could flick to the exact ones. But even then it got annoying because when you undog-ear and then dog-ear the next page, the memory is still there, so you might flick to the wrong one. I generally don't dog-ear. I use bookmarks. A book I can always reread. Basically, I'm young, so I don't reread. Not like that's a philosophy, but I just haven't been rereading because, there's a lot of books to read. I don't disagree with rereading. There's a lot of books I want to reread. It's just that when it comes time to pick the next book, I'm thinking, okay, well, I've never read A Tale of Two Cities, which is right here in front of me. So let me read that next. But, I like the Sherlock Holmes stories a lot. I like Shakespeare a lot. Those are people that I go back to. Stories that I've read before, those are people I go back to. I mentioned them earlier. But in terms of big books, big novels and, big investments of time, I still haven't gone back to many. Or barely any. When I was a kid, I used to do that a lot, but not so much now. Wait, I feel like I skipped the book you're currently reading question. I answered it, I think, just by another question, but it's this. I just finished Moby Dick, by the way, yesterday. Is it somewhere here? No, it's probably back on that Penguin shelf. I finished it yesterday, and it was amazing. Probably a whole video on that. Hopefully some sort of unique, cool video on that. But anyways, I jumped straight after that yesterday into this, My Lunches with Orson, which I mentioned in my previous video, The Book Haul. These are transcribed interviews with Orson Welles, but not really interviews, more like discussions with a friend over lunches. They feel really natural. They feel very raw. Orson Welles told Henry Jaglom, the guy who's interviewing him, to sort of just record their conversations because Henry had done that with his dad, I think. But Orson said the main rule is for this, just keep the audio recorder hidden because I think he didn't want it to interfere with their just normal conversations while they're eating lunch, while they're ordering food, talking about life and film and politics and things like that. I love Orson Welles. He's such a big personality, a fascinating person. So this book has been fun so far, and maybe I'll make a video on Orson Welles and this book when I finish it soon. But now back to the scheduled programming in terms of the question order. And it's, can you read while listening to music? I definitely can, and I definitely do quite a bit. Not always, but quite a bit. I actually didn't used to do it at all until I read Dracula about 3 years ago on this month, for Halloween. And I picked some spooky Dracula adjacent music with some graphics. It was a big compilation video or a 5-hour loop thing that I put on my TV with these stormy sound effects. It was nice. It really added to the atmosphere. And then sometimes I played one of the scores from the Coppola Dracula film. There's one thing when you're listening to music while reading a book. You need to pick the right music so it's not altering a great deal of the way you think about the book and the vibe and the atmosphere. With Dracula, there's no going wrong with actual Dracula scores or Dracula adjacent music. It's not changing the mood for you, but other books you have to beware. So if I don't find a good track, which I didn't really with Moby Dick, I'm not going to listen to anything. I'm just going to read the book, like it was intended. But one thing for me is that I go on the train a lot, lots of different commutes. I hate the train, but I'm always on it. And they're loud, noisy, people are talking all the time. So it's good to wear my AirPods, have the active noise cancellation, and listen to a nice instrumental score that, fits the vibe of the book, takes away all the background noise away from me, and just lets me immerse myself in the book. On the tube in London, just on normal trains, that's really useful. So yeah. The next question is one point of view or multiple point of views in books. This is another one that I find tough to answer because I guess I don't think about it that much. Maybe if I was Maybe I was thinking more critically, then I would be thinking about it more if I was reviewing books or something. But maybe if I reverse engineer this question and look at some of my favorite books, I'd probably say multiple point of views, because most of those are multiple point of views. Something like War and Peace, where you're spending time with so many different characters, that's probably a little better, but this isn't a hard and fast rule. Moby Dick is kind of a, it's all narrated by Ishmael, so it's a one point of view, one perspective. But Ishmael's a weird narrator. Sometimes he's narrating things that he couldn't possibly have seen, he wasn't a part of, so how are you narrating them? Sometimes he just goes invisible. Half of the book, it just feels like it's Melville speaking directly to you, as opposed to Ishmael, really. So it's a bit of a weird one point of view book. But nevertheless, probably multiple, but I don't really mind. Do I read a book in one sitting or over multiple days? Well, this entirely depends on the book. If it's a short novel, novella, 100 pages, 150, then I might intentionally pick it and decide that this is going to be like a single day thing. Sometimes I'll fail and I'll fall asleep. So I recently read Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, and I think I had read it the same day when finishing another book, so I was pretty tired, so I split it over 2 days. But typically that's the length of a book that I would decide, okay, I'm just going to sit down, read this whole thing, enjoy the whole single experience. Normally, something like Moby Dick, for example, no way, I'm not Steve Donahue. That is not getting done in one sitting. That is taking a lot of time, multiple days, multiple weeks when it's that long. Though if I'm staying consistent, which is really sort of my aim with reading now, I think that's my main focus, then something like Moby Dick, even as long and difficult as it is, should really only take a week at most. I try to read 3 hours a day. That's something I know I can do and something that I enjoy. But, distractions. And all that's left to do now is to tag people. So I want to tag everyone. Specifically, let's tag Michael K. Vaughan if he wants to do this kind of a video. No pressure. I know the videos that Michael K. Vaughan usually makes are like just sci-fi, horror related, just fantasy, just comic books. So only the tags that fit those. But this is general. Maybe you could do it. I'll tag Hannah at Hannah's Books. I know that right now she's probably in recovery from a shoulder operation. Feels like I'm picking all the unavailable people. But Hannah does great videos, does great tags. Maybe this is too unbrainy for her. Not brainy enough, not deep enough for her usual videos. Maybe I should make a new tag, Hannah's 20 Bookish Questions, and they'll be really nitty gritty. How you read, why you read type questions, and because those are the questions she likes to ask, so we should ask them of her. But yeah, tag Hannah when she gets back, and hopefully everything goes well for her. I know Steve's done this already, Christopher Russell's already done this. I'll tag Michael on BookTube. He started his BookTube channel when I came back to YouTube, so if he's still making videos, I saw he stopped maybe like a month ago, but if you're still making videos, you can do this tag. Book Chat with Pat. She does great videos. Can you do this tag? You do great tags. And you make a lot of videos as well, so you could fit this in. Matthew at Maybury Book Club. One of my favourite booktubers. Just always great fun watching your videos. I feel like everyone can do this tag. It's not specific to anything. It's general. As Steve says, it's good to tell people general bookish facts about you every so often, because there's always new people coming to your channel. Yeah, is that everyone? If there's someone I wanted to tag that I forgot, I'll put them on the screen. Thank you for watching.